All right, we are starting today with Shrimad Bhagavata Mahapurana, Book 10, Discourse 5. Discourse 5 is on festivities connected with the birth of Lord Sri Krishna at Gokula. Sri Shuka resumed. This comes immediately after the baby Krishna was brought to Gokula village, and everyone there thinks that he was just born to Yashoda, the wife of the village chief Nanda. Calling in Brahmanas, well versed in the art of fortune telling and having made them repeat benedictory hymns, the high-souled Nanda, on the other hand, who was rejoiced at the thought of a son having been born to him in his ripe old age, because Nanda and his wife Yashoda were old enough that they didn't think it was going to be possible for her to bear a child. But surprisingly, she did. And who had just bathed and attained purity by bathing and was duly adorned, had the Jatakarma ceremony actually performed with respect to the baby according to precept, and also called the Pitris and gods in the form of the Nandi Sradha and so on to be worshipped. The Jatakarma ceremony consists, it's one of the 16 sanskara ceremonies of Dvijas, and it consists in touching the tongue of a newborn child 3 times with ghee after appropriate prayers. Some versions also touch it with gold and other particular substances. They're doing this because they're a traditional Vaishya family, being cowherds. He gave away to the Brahmanas 2 lakhs of newly calved and richly adorned cows, as well as 7 mountain-like piles of sesamum seeds, studded with a vast number of precious stones and covered with a piece of gold cloth. Material substances get purified through passage of time, bath and washing, sacraments, asceticism, sacrificial performances, charitable gifts, and contentment, while the soul is purified through self-knowledge. Brahmanas, as well as Sutas, Magadhas, and Vandis, uttered benedictory words. Sutas are those who recite stories from the Puranas, like we're doing. Magadhas are no other than bards reciting the glories of ancestors of kings, while Vandis are those who make observances suited to particular occasions, like celebrations like this for the birth of a child. Songsters sang songs, while kettle drums and larger drums sounded again and again. Vraja, the village of Vraja, where they are, had its doorways, courtyards, and interiors of houses well swept and duly sprinkled with water, and was decorated with flags and buntings of various colors, as well as with arches made of wreaths, textiles, and leaves. Cows, bulls, and grown-up calves were daubed with oil mixed with turmeric, painted with minerals of various colors, and decked with peacock plumes, wreaths, cloth, and gold necklaces. Cowherds dressed in costly loincloths, coats, and turbans, and adorned with valuable jewels, flocked in the house of Nanda, carrying presents of various kinds in their hands, O Parikshit. Rejoiced to hear of the birth of a son to Yashoda, cowherd women too beautified their person with clothes, ornaments, collyrium, and so on. The charm of their lotus face, heightened by decorations of fresh saffron paste, corresponding to the filaments of a lotus, they, despite their bulky buttocks, walked hurriedly with presents in the shape of gold rings, necklaces of jewels, raiments, fruits, and blades of panic grass, etc., their breasts shaking on account of their rapid movement. Adorned with well-polished, bejeweled earrings and a string of gold coins worn about their neck, as well as with bangles, and clad in raiments of various colors, the cowherd women shone brightly while proceeding to the palace of Nanda, flowers fallen from their braids being strewn in a shower on the way, and looked gracefully with the earrings and the necklaces hanging on their breasts, swinging about rapidly. Invoking divine blessings on the boy in the words, "May you protect the baby for a long time, O Lord," and sprinkling the multitude with water mixed with turmeric powder and oil, they sang in a high pitch. Now that the immortal Lord Sri Krishna, the ruler of the universe, had come down to Vraja, musical instruments of various kinds were played upon that occasion of great rejoicing. spraying with curds, milk, clarified butter, and water, and besmearing the face of one another with handfuls of fresh butter. The merry cowherds threw one another at the feet in mirth. For the purpose of propitiating Lord Vishnu, as well as for the welfare of his son, the high-souled and liberal-minded Nanda conferred on them, as well as on the Sutas, the Maghadas, and the Vandis and others, who lived by their art or science, such as musicians, physicians, astrologers, dancers, and interpreters of omens, raiment, ornaments, and cattle wealth, and suitably honored them with gifts desired by them. Felicitated by Nanda, the cowherd chief, the highly blessed Rohini too moved about as the virtual mistress of Nanda's household, receiving the female guests and ordering the servants, decked with supernal clothes, garlands, and necklaces. Rohini is one of the wives of Vasudeva, the husband of Devaki. She's staying here as a guest in Nanda's house for fear of Kansa, mainly. Thenceforward, Nanda's Vraja became the seat of all prosperity, turning into the very playground of goddess Rama, or the goddess Lakshmi, by virtue of its native excellences peculiar to an abode of Lord Sri Hari, O protector of men. Having charged the cowherds with the protection of Gokula, Nanda went to Mathura in order to pay his annual tribute to Kansa, or jewel of the Kurus. Reliably hearing of his friend Nanda having come to Mathura and coming to know that he had paid his tribute, Vasudeva repaired to his camp to see him and inquire about his own sons, Balarama and Sri Krishna. Rejoiced to see him come, and at once rising to his feet, even as a body lying unconscious would do on consciousness returning to it, Nanda folded his most beloved friend in the arms, overwhelmed as he was with affection. Welcomed by Nanda and honored with an inquiry after his health, and comfortably seated, Vasudeva, whose mind was deeply attached to his sons, spoke as follows, O protector of the people. It is a matter for congratulation, O brother, that an issue has now been vouchsafed to you, aged and issueless as you were, and had been shut out from all hopes of getting a progeny. Through good luck, you have been perceived today like one reborn on this whirligig of mundane existence, for the sight of a loved one is difficult to obtain. The living together at one and the same place of friends engaged in diverse occupations, which is so agreeable, is not always possible, any more than that of wooden planks, etc., swept along by the current of a river, and that they may be brought together or they may be separated by circumstance. Is that Vrahadvana, another name of the village Gokula, where you are residing at present, surrounded by your kith and kin, favorable to cattle, free from diseases, and provided with abundant water, grass, and plants, cherished by you both, your wife and yourself, and recognizing you as his father, is my son Balarama, O brother, doing well with his mother Rohini in your Vraja. Indeed, the threefold object of human pursuit, meaning dharma, artha, and kama, is recommended only insofar as it is shared with one's near and dear ones. When the latter are in distress, such threefold pursuit does not make for happiness. Nanda replied, Born of Devaki, O friend, many a son of yours has been killed, alas, by Kansa. Only one daughter subsequently born was left, having escaped death at his cruel hands, but she ascended to heaven. Indeed, a created being depends on its destiny and is controlled by destiny. He who knows destiny to be his very essence, the unfailing cause of his happiness and misery, does not get infatuated. Vasudeva said, The annual tribute has actually been paid to the king, and we too have been seen by you. You should not therefore stay here long, for there are startling occurrences at Gokula too. Sri Shuka continued. The general tone of that conversation seems to be a summary rather than the whole detailed conversation they had. But Sri Shuka continued, Thus exhorted by Vasudeva, the son of Shura, and taking leave of him, the said cowherds headed by Nanda returned to Gokula riding on their carts drawn by bullocks. And thus ends the fifth discourse, entitled The Meeting of Nanda and Vasudeva, in the first half of Book 10 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 6, on the deliverance of Putana. Sri Shuka resumed. Pondering on his way that the words of Vasudeva, the son of Shura, could not be untrue, Nanda sought Sri Hari as his refuge, apprehensive as he was of the coming of startling events. Dispatched by Kansa, the terrible demoness Putana, who was given to killing infants, moved about in towns, villages, cowherd stations, etc., killing infants wherever she found them. Ogresses and others find their way, the term being translated, I believe, as Rakshasis. Rakshasis and others find their way only there where people, though devoted to their duties, perhaps, do not practice the hearing, etc., of the names and stories of Lord Vishnu, the protector of devotees, capable of exterminating the Rakshasas. Reaching Gokula, ruled over by Nanda, on one occasion, and disguising herself as a woman through her witchcraft, the said Putana, who was capable of coursing through the air and could go anywhere she pleased, entered the village. Seeing that lovely woman, clad in fine clothes, with jasmine flowers tucked to her braid, her slender waist pressed, as it were, between her bulky hips and her full breasts, and with her face set off with curly locks radiant with the luster of her swinging earrings, the gopis thought her to be the most beautiful Lakshmi coming to see her spouse, distinguished as she was by her hand bearing a lotus and captivating the mind of the inhabitants of Raja by her sidelong looks accompanied with sweet smiles. Hunting for infants and propelled by providence, Putana saw lying in a bed in that palace of Nanda the baby Sri Krishna, the destroyer of the wicked, with his immeasurable glory veiled, like fire buried under ashes. Recognizing her to be an evil spirit given to the destruction of infants, Sri Krishna, the soul of the mobile and immobile creation, lay with his eyes utterly closed. She placed the infinite Lord, her very death, in her lap, even as an ignorant man would a sleeping serpent mistaking it for a rope. Seeing inside the house that excellent woman, whose outward behavior was most affectionate, like that of a mother, though she was possessed of a cruel heart, and thus resembled a sword encased in a charming scabbard, and overwhelmed with her splendor, the two mothers, Rohini and Yashoda, stood merely gazing. Taking Sri Krishna in her lap there, that cruel woman put into the baby's mouth her dreadful breast besmeared with deadly poison. Squeezing it hard with both his hands, the Lord, full of indignation, forthwith sucked the poison along with her very life. Being wrung in all her vital parts, she cried out, saying, "Leave me, oh, leave me, enough of it." Distending her eyes and tossing about her feet and arms again and again, she actually screamed, her limbs drenched with perspiration. As a result of her very deep and violent roar, the earth with its mountains and heaven with its planets shook, the subterranean worlds as well as the four quarters echoed, and people toppled down on the ground in the apprehension of a thunderbolt. Thus tormented, in other words, it sounded like lightning was striking near them, and so they dove to the ground for safety. Thus tormented at her breasts and reverting in her helpless state to her true demoniac form, she sprang up and fell dead in the outskirts of Raja, opening her mouth and flinging about her hair and stretching her legs and arms too, even like the demon Vritra knocked down by the thunderbolt of Indra, the protector of men. Even while falling down, her huge body crushed, O ruler of kings, trees within an area of 12 miles. That was a great wonder. This doesn't necessarily mean that she was 12 miles tall, but she was huge enough that while crashing along, she did level 12 miles of trees. Its mouth, the mouth of her corpse, was ranged with fearful teeth as long as a plow tree. Its nostrils resembled a pair of mountain caves. Its breasts looked like a couple of huge rocks. Its coppery hair hung loose. Its eyes were deep like a well overgrown with plants, etc., referring to the eyelashes. It looked terrible with its hips resembling sandbanks. Its arms, thighs, and feet resembled dams, while its sunken belly looked like a waterless pond. The cowherds and cowherdesses were really much frightened to see that fearful body, their heart, ears, and head having already been split, as it were, by her yell. And finding the boy fearlessly playing on her bosom, the cowherd women quickly went up to him and picked him up, alarmed as they were. Along with Yashoda and Rohini, they fully ensured the safety of the boy against evil spirits on all sides by waving round him the tail of a cow, which has been declared in the scriptures to be the seat of the goddess Lakshmi, and other occult rites, most of them generally drawn from the Atharva Veda. And since the Atharva Veda consists, a large part of the Atharva Veda is occult rites against evil spirits. Having bathed the boy with the urine of a cow, which is held to be as sacred as the water of the holy Ganga, and again sprinkling him with the dust from under the hoofs of cows, which is considered to be as good as sprinkling with the totality of all the sacred waters. They further ensured his security by daubing him with cow dung, which is recognized as another seat of the goddess Lakshmi, at 12 specific points on his body, while uttering 12 different names of the Lord. And here it does not specify, but in the Padma Purana, it says what the 12 points and the 12 names are. That the name of Keshava is taken with a mark of cow dung on the forehead, Narayana with a mark on the belly, Madhava with a mark in the center of the chest, Govinda with a mark on the back of the neck, Vishnu with a mark on the right side of the abdomen, Madhusudana with a mark on the right arm, Trivikrama with a mark on the front of the neck, Vamana on the left side of the abdomen, Sridhara with a mark on the left arm, Rishikesha with another mark on the neck. So you've got 2 marks on the front of the neck and 1 on the back. Padmanabha in the middle of the back, and the name of Damodara with a mark of cow dung on the waist. So that's the Kavacha procedure that they did. Having sipped water and assigned a number of seed letters representing the first letters of the following 11 names of the Lord, each followed by the Anusvara, separately to the diverse limbs of their own body, to protect themselves also, as well as to the parts of their hands, the cowherd women next assigned the same seed letters to the limbs and parts of the hands of the baby. And so they did another Kavacha procedure. In this one they said, may Aja, the birthless Lord, protect your feet. Maniman, the Lord adorned with the Kaustubha gem, protect your knees. And Yajna, the deity presiding over Yajnas, protect your thighs. Achyuta, the immortal Lord, protect your loins. Hayagriva, the Lord endowed with the head of a horse, protect your abdomen. Keshava, the ruler even of Brahma and Shiva, protect your heart. Isha, the almighty Lord, protect your bosom. And Ina, the master, protect your throat. Vishnu, the all-pervading Lord, protect your arms. Urukrama, the Lord with long strides, protect your mouth. And Ishvara, the supreme Lord, protect your head. May the wielder of a discus stand as your protector before you, and Sri Hari endowed with a mace behind you. Madhusudana and Ajana, the birthless Lord, wielding a bow and a sword, stand on your 2 sides. Urugaya, the Lord sung by many, the wielder of a conch, at the 4 points intervening between the quarters. Lord Vamana, the younger brother of Indra, overhead. The rider of Garuda on the ground, and the supreme person, Lord Sankarshana, wielding a plow on all sides. May Hrishikesha protect your Indriyas, Narayana, your vital heirs. Vasudeva, the Lord of Shvetadvipa, protect your intellect. Aniruddha, the master of yoga, protect your mind. Prishnigarbha, or Pradyumna, protect your understanding. And Sankarshana, the all-destroying Lord, protect your ahankara, your ego. May Govinda, who sports in the senses, protect you while you are at play. Madhava protect you while you are lying down. Vaikunta protect you while walking. The Lord of Sri protect you while seated. And the enjoyer of yajnas, inspiring terror in all evil spirits, protect you while you are dining. Malevolent spirits such as Dakinis, Yatudhanis, and Kushmandas, evil spirits that seize their victims taking the form of babies, Bhutas, Pretas, and Pichachas, Yakshas, Rakshasas, and Vinayakas, Kotara, Revati, Jyeshta, Putana, the 16 Matrakas, and others such as Charaki and Valamukha, Unmadas, which are evil spirits causing insanity, and Apasmaras, which are evil spirits inducing apoplexy, that actually torment the body and the Indriyas and interfere with the vital functions. Those evil spirits responsible for portents of a grave nature seen in dreams, and those that seize the aged as well as youngsters. Terrified at the mention of the names of Lord Vishnu, may all these evil spirits die out. This is again a close version of a procedure from the Atharva Veda, which names all those same evil spirits and so on. Sri Shuka went on, giving suck to her son, whose safety had thus been ensured by the cowherd women, bound to him by ties of affection, the mother put him to sleep. Meanwhile, the party of cowherds headed by Nanda came back to the outskirts of Raja from Mathura and were greatly astonished to see the colossal body of Putana. They said to one another, "Oh, surely a seer has been really born in the person of Vasudeva, or he must have been a master of yoga in his previous incarnation, for that very calamity has actually been perceived, of which Anakadundhubi spoke to us." Anakadundhubi is another name that they call their friend Vasudeva in Mathura, who foresaw that there was some sort of trouble at Gokula village. Having hacked that body with axes and cast it piecemeal at a distance, it was so huge that they had to hack it apart with axes in order to carry it away from their village. Those inhabitants of Raja burnt it to ashes after it had been piled over with logs of wood. Out of that body, while it was being cremated, arose smoke emitting the fragrance of aloe wood, the sin attaching to it having been completely wiped out the moment its life was sucked out by Sri Krishna. Lo, Putana, a blood-sucking Rakshasi given to the destruction of infants in the world, and giving suck to Sri Hari even with the motive of killing him, attained the destiny of saints. How much more, then, should one deserve such a state, who offers one's most beloved, one's most beloved something with utmost reverence and devotion to Lord Sri Krishna, the Supreme Spirit, as did his affectionate mothers and cows full of motherly affection. Even the said Rakshasi Putana, whose breast the Lord sucked, covering her body with his feet which remain enshrined in the heart of his devotees and are worthy of being adored even by Brahma, Shiva, and others who are adored by the world, ascended to heaven, a destiny worthy of his mothers. What wonder, then, that the cows and mothers, the milk of whose breasts was lovingly sucked by Lord Sri Krishna, should attain that destiny. Rebirth which results from ignorance could never be possible, O Parikshit, in the case of those cows and those mothers that incessantly looked upon Sri Krishna as their son, whose milk, oozing out of parental affection, the divine son of Devaki, the bestower of liberation and all other blessings, sucked to his heart's content. Smelling the fragrance of the smoke rising from the crematorium, the inhabitants of Raja returned to Vraja, saying what a strange phenomenon it was, and whence the odor actually came. Hearing the story of Putana's arrival, etc., as well as of her subsequent death and the baby's safety, as told by the cowherds present there who had witnessed it all, they stood highly amazed. Taking up in his arms his son, who had returned from the jaws of death, as it were, and smelling him at the crown of his head, which is a traditional gesture of affection, the noble-minded Nanda experienced a great delight, O jewel of the Kurus. A man who hears or recites with reverence this story of this wonderful childlike sport, this Leela of Lord Sri Krishna consisting in the deliverance of Putana, comes to develop love for the said Sri Krishna, the protector of cows. Thus ends the 6th discourse in the first half of Book 10 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 7, the deliverance of the demon Trinavrta. The king Parikshit said, "The exploits which the Almighty Lord Sri Hari performs, through whatever avataranas it may be, are so charming to our ear and so appealing to our mind, O Master. If you think fit, therefore, kindly narrate in particular that story of Sri Hari, by listening to which the feeling of ennui and the diverse cravings responsible for such ennui of any man whatsoever disappear. His mind gets purified before long. Devotion to the aforesaid Sri Hari is generated, and friendship established with his servants. Pray further recount even other marvelous infantile leelas of Lord Sri Krishna, who imitated the ways of the human race when he came down to the mortal world." Sri Shuka resumed. Once, on the occasion of the ceremonial ablution of the infant Sri Krishna, to commemorate his turning in the bed, which generally takes place approximately at the end of 3 months. In other words, when the baby turns themselves over in bed, then this ablution is done. When the same nakshatra under which he was born, which was the Rohini nakshatra, happened to be at the ascendant, Yashoda performed in the midst of the ladies assembled at her residence the rite of sprinkling her son with water, accompanied by the playing of musical instruments, songs, and the chanting of sacred texts done by the Brahmanas. When the ablution and other rituals of Sri Krishna had been finished, and the ceremony of invoking blessings on him performed by the Brahmanas that had already been duly honored with gifts of cooked food and raw articles of food, raiment, garlands, boons sought by them, and cows, and when drowsiness was fully manifested in the baby's eyes, Nanda's wife gently put him to sleep on a cradle or cot, which they put underneath a cart, since evidently they were in an outdoor party, and so presumably to shade him from the sun, she tucked him underneath a cart. Busy honoring the inhabitants of Raja assembled for the occasion with a mind full of zeal over the festival commemorating Sri Krishna's turning over in bed, the noble-minded Yashoda did not at all hear the cry of her son, who, while actually crying for a suck, tossed up his feet in an angry mood. Hit by the tiny feet, tender as a leaf, of the baby, lying beneath the cart, which he kicked, turned upside down, with the result that the metal jars placed on it and containing various delicious substances, such as milk, curds, and ghee, were crushed, its wheels and axle tree inverted because he kicked the cart completely over onto its top, and its pole shattered. Perceiving it in that topsy-turvy condition, the women of Raja that had gathered at Nanda's residence for the festival commemorating the turning of Sri Krishna in the bed, headed by Yashoda as well as Nanda and others, who were perplexed at that amazing sight, wondered how the cart had actually turned upside down by itself. Boys who were playing there when the cart turned told the wondering cowherds and cowherdesses, whose mind was uncertain, that the cart had been knocked down with his foot by Sri Krishna while crying for his mother's breast. There was no doubt in their minds. Those cowherds, of course, did not believe this, taking it to be the mere talk of children and doubting it, for they did not understand the immeasurable strength of that boy. And there is a further story here, which was alluded to earlier in the Bhagavatam, but as it's actually told in its full detail only in other Puranas, and I think also in the Harivansha, that the great demon Hiranyaksha, who was slain by the Lord in the form of the boar, before he died, Hiranyaksha had a son called Utkacha, who was exceedingly powerful and well built. And Utkacha once crushed the trees of the ashram of the sage Lomasha, who cursed him that he would remain disembodied, that his body would drop off in death and that he wouldn't be able to take another body. And he felt that his physical sheath was about to fall off like a sloth. He fell prostrate at the feet of the sage and asked his forgiveness. Appeased by his penitent behavior, the sage Lomasha blessed him that in the course of the Vaivasvata Manvantara, he would be liberated by the touch of the feet of Lord Sri Krishna. And it was that disembodied spirit, Utkacha, that had entered the cart in Nanda's residence in his disembodied state and was liberated by the touch of the Lord's feet. Taking up her crying son, Yashoda, who was afraid of the presence of some evil spirit, having flipped the cart, gave him suck only after the ceremony of invoking blessings on him had been performed by Brahmanas with the help of Vedic hymns destroying evil spirits, again, most likely taken from the Atharva Veda. Having poured oblations into the sacred fire in order to propitiate the deities presiding over the planets and so on, the Navagrahas, the Brahmanas worshipped the cart, since a cart is the seat of their wealth in the shape of dairy products and thus the abode of Lakshmi, with curds, unbroken grains of rice, blades of the sacred kusha grass, and water, when it had been placed as before by mighty cowherds, and provided once more with all its goods, so set upright and with everything put back on it. Taking up the boy and sprinkling him with water consecrated through the recitation of sacred texts from the Sama Veda and the Yajur Veda, and hallowed with sanctifying herbs, causing benedictions to be pronounced by the foremost of Brahmanas and propitiating the sacred fire by pouring oblations into it, Nanda, the cowherd chief, who felt convinced that the benedictions uttered by those truthful ones, who are completely free from a carping spirit, mendacity, hypocrisy, jealousy, violence, and pride, never go in vain, gave to the Brahmanas very wholesome food to eat. For the purpose of ensuring his son's all-round prosperity, Nanda further gave away to the Brahmanas cows endowed with all good qualities and adorned with cloth, garlands, and gold necklaces, and they uttered their choicest blessings in return. Obviously, benedictions that are uttered by Brahmanas well versed in sacred prayers and united with God shall never prove fruitless and invariably come out true. One day, when Sri Krishna had just attained the age of 1 year, Yashoda, while she was busy fondling her son, seated in her lap, suddenly could not bear the weight of the baby, who had seemingly all of a sudden grown heavy as a mountain peak. Placing him on the ground, Yashoda, who felt astonished at this strange phenomenon and oppressed with burden, contemplated on the Supreme Person out of fear of some unexpected calamity, and set about her worldly duties, leaving the baby on the ground, who she found strangely heavy all of a sudden. A demon, Trinavrata by name, a servant of Kansa, particularly directed, appeared in the form of a whirlwind or a tornado, enveloping the entire Gokula village in particles of dust and blinding the eyes of all, and shaking the quarters as well as the intermediate directions with his most terrible roar, and carried away the squatting baby. For an hour or so, Vraja remained enveloped in dust and darkness. Yashoda did not find her son on the spot where she had set him, since, of course, as soon as this sudden tornado struck, she must have run straight there. Oppressed with particles of sands wafted by Trinavrata and utterly confused, one could not see one's own self, much less another. Not finding any trace of her son in the shower of dust occasioned by that violent whirlwind, and repeatedly thinking of him in a most pathetic manner, the helpless mother Yashoda lamented and dropped on the ground like a cow whose calf had died. Having heard the cry of Yashoda later on, when the wind had the vehemence of its shower of dust abated, and with their minds sore afflicted at not perceiving there the darling of Nanda, the cowherd women too wept, their face flooded with tears. Carrying away Lord Sri Krishna, Trinavrata, who had assumed the form of the whirlwind, went up to the skies to a certain height, but could not proceed further, his impetuosity having ceased now that he suddenly felt he was carrying a huge burden, since the Lord had grown heavy again. Taking that wonderful boy to be a rock because of his being heavier than himself, he could not cast him away, caught as he was by the throat. Rendered motionless by the extraordinary pressure at the throat and giving forth an indistinct groan, the demon fell down dead in the outskirts of Vraja, baby and all, his eyes having been shot out of their sockets. Not necessarily literally, but bulging with panic. The crying women assembled there saw the terrible demon fallen from his skies on a slab of stone, with all his limbs shattered, like the city cleft by the arrow of Lord Rudra. Nay, astonished to find Sri Krishna dangling on his breast, they picked him up and restored him to his mother. The cowherdesses and cowherds, gopis and gopas is the terms being used, headed by Nanda, so the tradition goes, experienced excessive joy to get back the baby, sound of body, though taken away by the Rakshasa through the air and extricated from the jaws of death a second time. Oh, what a joy! It is extremely wonderful that, though brought to an end by the Rakshasa, this boy has returned safe. The bloody and wicked fellow has been destroyed by his own sin, and a pious soul is completely rid of fear by virtue of his even-mindedness, since they assume that in both cases, with Putana and with Trinavrata, that the demons just miraculously died, not realizing that in fact the baby Krishna killed them. What austerities, worship of Lord Vishnu above sense perception, act of purta or acts of ishta, act of charity or act of benevolence to living beings has been performed by us, due to which the boy, though he should have been dead, has luckily enough appeared in our midst again, reviving us, his kinsfolk. So acts of purta and acts of ishta that they referred to are defined by different sages. The Manusmriti defines acts of purta as digging wells, big wells or small wells, tanks, etc., construction of temples, giving away food grains, and laying out gardens, which are all things that will bring good karma to do. And acts of ishta are defined by Prajapati Atri as pouring oblations into the sacred fire, practicing austerities, truthfulness, preserving the Vedas by committing them to memory, hospitality, and performing the Vaishvadeva rite. So that's what was meant by acts of Purta and acts of Ishta, that they're saying perhaps they did in past lives to earn such good karma. Amazed to see many more wonders of this kind at Brahadvana, or Gokula village, Nanda the cowherd chief esteemed the prophecy of Vasudeva again and again. One day, taking up the baby and placing him in her lap, the blessed Yashoda, overwhelmed with affection, made him suck her breast overflowing with milk. Caressing the mouth lit up with a charming smile of the baby, who had almost finished sucking, O king, the aforesaid mother saw in his mouth, while he was yawning, the following: the sky, the horizon, the host of luminaries in the night sky, the four quarters, the sun, the moon, fire, the air, and the oceans, the broad divisions of the globe, mountains, the rivers flowing from the mountains, forests and all created beings, stationary as well as moving. Seized with a tremor in her body to perceive the universe vividly all of a sudden, O Parikshit, in the mouth of the baby, and fully closing her eyes, as if like trying to kind of steady herself, Yashoda, whose eyes resembled those of a fawn, stood greatly amazed. Thus ends the 7th discourse, entitled The Deliverance of Trinavrata, in the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 8, the naming ceremony of the Lord and his infantile sports. Sri Shuka began again. Importuned by Vasudeva, Garga, the family priest of the Yadus, who was a very great ascetic, O king, repaired to Nanda's Vraja. So just to clarify the terms Vraja versus Gokula, for anyone who doesn't know, Vraja is a whole region. It's still there in India today, still called Vraja. Today it's been sadly mostly deforested, but historically it was a forest region containing many villages. The particular village that Krishna is living in within the forest land of Vraja is called Gokula. Supremely delighted to see him, and rising from his seat with joined palms by way of welcome, Nanda worshipped him, prostrating himself at the very outset and recognizing him to be Lord Vishnu, who was above sense perception, in the person of a realized Brahmana. Delighting the sage with sweet words when hospitality had been offered to him and he was comfortably seated, Nanda said, "O Holy One, what can we do for you, who are fully gratified? The stirring out of exalted souls like you is directed towards the supreme good of men like me, attached to their household and distressed in mind, O venerable sage, and is never meant otherwise. A popular treatise on Jyotisha, from which proceeds the knowledge of supersensuous phenomena and through which any man can know the cause of his present happiness and misery in the shape of past good and evil deeds, as well as its effect in the shape of the pleasurable and painful experiences of this life, has been directly composed by you. Besides being a master of Jyotish, you are the foremost of the knowers of Veda and are thus qualified to perform the purificatory rites, such as the naming ceremony, with respect to these two boys. For a Brahmana is the guru of all men by virtue of his birth." Garga replied, "I am the family priest of the Yadus and known as such all over the globe. People would take your son, if consecrated by me through purificatory rites, as Devaki's son. Pondering that the 8th progeny of Devaki ought not to be a girl, ever since he has heard the remark of Devaki's daughter that his slayer has been born somewhere else, and bearing in mind the friendship, or has been born and is somewhere else, and bearing in mind the friendship between you and Anakadundhubi, the evil-minded Kansa may have his suspicion aroused if I were to perform the purificatory rites for your sons. If, therefore, God forbid, he should kill your son under such suspicion, that would be a serious blunder on our part." Nanda said, "Unperceived even by my own people, kindly perform in this cow pen, in secret, the purificatory rite, the naming ceremony appropriate to a member of the twice-born, the Dvija classes, after uttering the benedictory hymns." Vishuka went on, thus entreated by Nanda, and himself remaining concealed, the sage performed in secret in a cowshed, the naming ceremony with respect to the two boys, the sons of Rohini and Yashoda, that was sought to be done by himself. Garga observed, delighting his kinsfolk with his excellences, this son of Rohini, as a matter of fact, will be styled as Rama, the delighter of the people. And due to his superiority of strength, people will remember him as Bala, or strength personified, which will combine to give him it, starting as a nickname, but becoming the name by which he's most commonly called, Balarama. Because of his observing no distinction between the Yadus, people will also recognize him as Sankarshana, the unifier of the different Yadu branches, since he won't play favorite to his own branch. Taking diverse forms, indeed, in each yuga, Yashoda's son has manifested 3 different colors, white, red, and yellow. This time he has assumed a dark complexion. Sometime in the past, this son of yours was born in the house of Vasudeva. Hence the wise who know this truth will duly designate him as the glorious Vasudeva, which both means son of Vasudeva, but also is one of the names of the Lord Vishnu. There are numerous names and forms of your son, conforming to his excellences and actions. I know them, not the commonality. In other words, most people do not know them. The delight of the cowherds, nay, of the entire Gokula, this boy will bring you happiness. By his help, you will easily surmount all difficulties. Protected and strengthened by him during a period of anarchy in former times, the Lord of Raja, pious souls tormented by robbers, eventually conquered the robbers. Enemies cannot overpower those highly blessed souls who offer love to this boy, any more than demons can overpower those whose cause has been espoused by Lord Vishnu. Therefore, this son of yours, O Nanda, is a compeer of Lord Narayana in point of excellences, splendor, fame, and glory. And this is a rather clever reference, because earlier Lord Narayana himself in the Bhagavatam, when asked as a boon for a son who is his compeer in point of excellences, splendor, fame, and glory, and granted the boon, said that since there is no such compeer, he would have to take birth himself. And so here the sage Garga, who knows who Krishna really is cleverly saying without really saying that he is an avatar of Vishnu, by saying that he is a compeer of Lord Narayana, which of course does not exist unless he in fact is Lord Narayana. Please look after him intently. And when Garga, having duly instructed Nanda, had returned to his abode at Mathura, Nanda felt much delighted and deemed himself full of all blessings. Not long afterwards, Balarama and Keshava being one of the many names of Sri Krishna, began to sport in Gokula, going about on hands and knees. Moving briskly on the muddy grounds of Raja, dragging both their feet behind them in a most charming way, the tiny bells of their anklets and girdle making a tinkling noise, and their mind delighted to hear the sound, and following any passerby to some distance, the 2 boys would soon return to their mothers like innocent and terrified babies, when the passerby would turn round and look at them, and they discovered him to be a stranger who they had been following. Folding in their arms their sons, who looked charming with mud that served to beautify their person as a paint, and giving them suck, their 2 mothers, whose breasts were overflowing with milk due to their motherly affection, experienced ecstatic joy indeed to behold their countenance bright with a winning smile and small teeth, even as they sucked their breasts with relish. When the 2 boys were old enough to be engaged in boyish sports, so captivating to the eyes of young women, the latter would then feel delighted to gaze on them both, being dragged behind hither and thither in the interior of Raja by calves whose tails were tightly seized by them, and stood laughing, leaving their homestead. When their mothers did not succeed in restraining their most restless sons, absorbed as they were in play, from horned animals and those having sharp teeth, fire, sword, water, birds, and thorns, nor could they attend to their domestic duties, they would experience a great distraction of mind because of the sometimes rather dangerous adventures that these 2 boys would get into. After a short time, O Raja Rishi, Balarama and Sri Krishna began to move about with ease in Gokula on their feet without rubbing their knees on the ground. Then in course of time, Lord Sri Krishna, accompanied by Balarama, began to sport with the boys of Raja of his own age, bringing delight to the women of Raja thereby. Gazing on the charming boyish pranks of Sri Krishna, the cowherd women of Raja called at his residence in a body. In other words, a bunch of them came together and actually spoke as follows to his mother, who was all ears. Occasionally untethering the calves before time when we are unwary, and thus allowing them to suck all of the milk of their mothers, and with his risibility excited by scolding, your darling swallows our tasteful curds and milk stolen through thieving devices contrived by him. He not only drinks them himself, but deals them out in order to feed them to monkeys. And if a monkey drinks no more, he smashes the jar containing the rest of the curds and milk. Enraged with the people of the house, if he does not get anything to eat, he departs, setting the infants of the house crying by pinching them. Where the milk, etc., is kept in swings, etc., hanging beyond the reach of his hands, because they'd often store it in like rope hammocks hung from the ceiling. That's a traditional way to keep them away from monkeys. He contrives plans to get at it with the help of wooden seats and mortars, etc., that he'll drag over or stack on top of each other to climb up to it. Possessed of insight into the contents of the pots and expert in the art of making holes in them, he strikes holes into the pots placed in swings. If he's not able to stack furniture up, he'll like throw rocks at them to break them or something and then eat the dripping curds. In a dark room, he uses his own person wearing hosts of gems as a lamp to reveal things. And he does all this at a time when the cowherd women have their mind fully engrossed in their household duties. He commits nuisance in our tidy homes and does other such mischievous acts. And having accomplished his work through pilfering devices, he sits by your side as if a very innocent boy. Yashoda, to whom the matter was thus reported at length by the cowherd women, who watched the charming countenance of Sri Krishna, gazing with terrified eyes as his various crimes were reported to her, did not feel inclined to rebuke her son and stood with a laughing face. One day, while at play, the cowherd boys, headed by Balarama, complained to Yashoda, the mother of Sri Krishna, that Krishna had eaten earth. Taking Sri Krishna by the hand and chiding him, the said Yashoda, who sought his welfare and found that his eyes cast a bewildered look, as if he's pretending that he has no idea what she's talking about, spoke to him as follows. Why did you eat earth surreptitiously, O unruly child? Indeed, these boys, your playmates, as well as this elder brother of yours, say so. Sri Krishna replied, I never ate earth, O mother, they're all liars. If they're truthful, then examine my mouth with your own eyes. And she says, if so, then open your mouth. Thus urged, the aforesaid Lord Srihari, whose lordship is unobstructed and who had in Leela assumed the form of a human child, opened his mouth. There inside the Lord's mouth, she beheld the whole universe consisting of the moving and the stationary, the atmosphere, the four quarters, the terrestrial globe with its mountains, principal divisions and oceans, and including the wind, the fire of lightning, the moon as well as the stars, heaven, water, fire, the air, and the sky. The deities presiding over the Indriyas were modifications of the Sattvika Ahankara, the mind, the Indriyas themselves, modifications of the Rajasika ego, the objects of senses, modifications of the Tamasika ego, and the three gunas. Synchronously observing in the infantile body of her son, in his wide open mouth, this wonderful universe, consisting of a variety of organisms, moving as well as immobile, owing their diversity to the jiva, kala, nature, karma, the tendency to action, as well as Vraja, including herself and her son. Yashoda was seized with dismay. She thought within herself, is this a dream or illusion set up by the Lord? Or alas, is it delusion of my mind or some inborn characteristic divine glory of this very infant of mine? Therefore, I bow down to that ultimate goal, Brahman, which is most difficult to comprehend, which cannot be easily and correctly guessed through the intellect, mind, actions, and words, which is the ground of this universe, and by means of which is presiding over the senses, and because of which it is perceived. He, that Lord alone, is my refuge, by whose Maya has been generated in me. This perverse egotistic notion that I am Yashoda, the chaste wife of Nanda, the Lord of Raja, the mistress of his entire fortune, and he my husband, that this child Sri Krishna is my son, and that the cowherds and cowherdesses of Raja, as well as the cattle wealth and so on, are mine. On the cowherdess Yashoda, who had thus realized the truth, that Almighty Lord Sri Krishna cast his divine charm, in the form of maternal affection for him. Placing Sri Krishna, her son, in her lap, the aforesaid cowherd lady, whose revelation had instantly disappeared, being covered over again by Krishna's Maya, stood with her heart full of intense affection, even as before. Once again, she regarded Sri Hari, whose glory is being celebrated by the three Vedas as well as by the Upanishads, even by the Sankhya and Yoga systems of philosophy, and by the Vaishnava Shastras, such as the Pancharatra of Devarishi Narada, as her own son. The king Parikshit said, "What meritorious act did Nanda perform so as to deserve such great fortune? And what did the highly blessed Yashoda do, whose breast Sri Hari himself sucked, while his parents, Vasudeva and Devaki, did not even get to behold the charming infantile leelas of Lord Sri Krishna, which sages glorify even to this day, and which, when sung, are capable of wiping out the sins of the whole world?" Sri Shuka continued, "Intent upon carrying out the behests of Brahma, for being incarnated in Vraja as a cowherd and a cowherdess, Drona, the foremost of the Vasus, along with his wife Dhara, spoke to him as follows: When we are born on earth, let the highest type of devotion appear in us towards Sri Hari, the supreme deity, the ruler of the universe, through which one is sure to escape from evil destiny in this world." Replied to in the words, "Let it be so." He was reborn in Vraja and became known as the worshipful and illustrious Nanda, while the aforesaid Dhara became Yashoda. As a result of that boon, devotion to Lord Vishnu, who became their son, appeared in the couple in a special degree among the cowherds and cowherdesses of Vraja, the scion of Bharata. In other words, all the gopas and gopis of Vraja had devotion to Lord Vishnu, but Nanda and Yashoda more than all the others, or at least more than most of the others. Dwelling in Vraja along with Balarama in order to fulfill the boon of Brahma, Sri Krishna, the Almighty Lord, brought delight to them all by his childish leelas. Thus ends the 8th discourse, bearing on a vision of the cosmic form of the Lord, in the first half of Book 10 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 9, Further Grace Showered on Yashoda. Sri Shuka resumed, "One day, when the maidservants of the house were engaged in other work connected with the annual worship of Indra, Yashoda, Nanda's wife, personally churned the curds and boiled the milk for her son. Recalling at the time of churning the curds whatever infantile sports of her son were sung there in Vraja, she celebrated them in song." So the people are already writing songs and singing songs about Krishna's leelas, even while they're going on. "Wearing round her wide loins a silk garment similar to a petticoat fastened with a string, and bearing on her bosom a pair of shaking breasts overflowing with milk from affection for her son, as she sings about him, a face covered with sweat because the weather's hot and she's working hard churning milk, a pair of earrings and a pair of bangles moving about her forearms, fatigued with pulling the string, that handsome lady churned the curds with her full strength, jasmine blossoms dropping from her braid. Coming up to his mother while she was engaged in churning the curds, and holding the churning stick, Sri Hari, full of longing for a suck, stopped her, bringing joy to her by his loving and lovable gestures. She suckled Sri Krishna, who had now climbed up to her lap, at her breast overflowing with milk from affection, looking into his smiling countenance. When, however, the milk kept on the oven, over the fire, began to overflow, boiling over, in other words, she went out in haste to remove the boiling milk from the hearth, in order to save it from being spilt, leaving him unsated. Biting hard his quivering, ruddy lip, his indignation having been aroused by having suddenly been yanked off in the middle of breastfeeding, and she ran away, he broke the pot for churning the curds by means of a flat piece of stone on a slab. The flat piece of stone is kept there for grinding condiments with, etc. With counterfeit tears in his eyes, he went to the interior of the house and clandestinely ate fresh butter stored there. Having taken down the milk, which was fully boiled now, the cowherd lady entered again to find the pot of curds broken, and knowing it to be the work of her son, whom she did not see there, she laughed heartily. Then, observing her son firmly standing on the overturned base of a wooden mortar and freely giving fresh butter kept on a swing to a monkey with eyes full of fear due to his theft having been detected, she gently went up to him from behind. Clearly perceiving her with a rod held in her hand in order to threaten him, Sri Krishna got down in haste from the mortar and ran away like one afraid. Yashoda ran after him whom even the mind of yogis, attuned through concentration and capable of penetrating into his reality, could not reach. Pursuing his son, the handsome mother, whose progress was retarded by the weight of her bulky moving hips and who was followed, as it were, by the flowers dropping from her loosened braid, eventually she caught hold of him. Holding by the hand her son, who had committed an offense and was accordingly weeping aloud and rubbing with his own hands his eyes, with their collyrium spreading on all sides, since it was traditional that they would dress him up with eyeliner around his eyes, which he's now smearing, of course, who was looking up with eyes agitated from fear, she threatened to strike him with a view to frightening him. In other words, that she's not planning to actually strike him, but she holds the stick, attempting to frighten him. Perceiving her son to be frightened, and thus having achieved her purpose and casting off the rod, Yashoda, who was exceedingly fond of her child and was ignorant of his glory, sought to bind him with a string, so the tradition goes. In relation to the Lord, there is neither inside nor outside, neither before nor behind. At the same time, he exists before as well as after, inside as well as outside the universe. Nay, he is the universe itself. Regarding that unmanifest Lord who is above sense perception, though now disguised in a human semblance, as her own son, the cowherd lady proceeded to tie him to a wooden mortar with a string, even as one would bind a human child. While her infant son, who had committed an offense, was being bound, the string fell short by about an inch, and the cowherdess Yashoda joined another string to it. When that composite string too fell short by about an inch, she joined yet another to it. In this way, every new string she took up, for being joined to those already untied, still fell short by nearly an inch, even though putting together all the strings in her house as aforesaid. Yashoda smiled in the midst of the other cowherdesses, smiling at her frustration, and felt amazed at this evident miracle that Sri Krishna could not be bound. Perceiving the overexertion of his mother, whose body was bathed in perspiration because weather was hot to begin with, she was churning curd, and then she was chasing him, the wreaths tied round her braid all fallen down, Sri Krishna allowed himself to be bound out of sheer compassion. Thus indeed was demonstrated by Sri Krishna his amenability to the control of him by his devotees, even though he is absolute master of himself, and although this universe, along with its rulers, Brahma and others, is subject to his control, O dear Parikshit. Neither Brahma the creator, nor Lord Shiva the source of the universe, nor the goddess Sri, who has her abode on his very person, received such aforesaid grace from him, the bestower of release, as Yashoda did. The said Lord Sri Krishna, the son of Yashoda, is not so easily accessible in this world to those identified with their body, or even to men of wisdom, who are not so identified and have become one with him, as he is for those possessed of devotion to him. While his mother was engrossed in her household duties, Lord Sri Krishna now noticed a pair of Arjuna trees that had been in their previous life two yakshas, sons of Kubera, the bestower of riches and full of splendor, known as Nalakubara and Manigriva, and reduced to the state of trees due to the curse uttered by Narada on account of their arrogance. Thus ends the 9th discourse, entitled Grace Showered on the Gopi Yashoda, in the first half of Book 10 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. And I think that might be a good stopping place for today. The next story on the two sons of Kubera is a somewhat long one, and it's 10 o'clock, so I feel like it might be a good place to break and get into that one next time.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you guys for coming.
and happy holidays, and always thank you. Always thank you, because all these episodes, I kind of remember performing it as a dance drama into the school.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's great.
Yeah.
I cannot thank you guys enough to bring this such beautiful memories. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you all for coming. Yeah. These are some of the most famous stories that everybody loves about Krishna, for sure. This is definitely the most popular part of the Bhagavatam right here.
Right. And especially like when we were in the school, we're children. So these are the most popular one as a children.
Of course. We all, I same here. I grew up with all these. Yeah.
Right. And performing it during the holidays and all that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Thank you all for coming. Yeah. Happy holidays. I'm glad. I wasn't sure how many people were going to be able to make it just the morning after Christmas if they were celebrating or busy with families and stuff. But yeah, thank you all for making it.
Whenever I can, I'm making that one a priority.
Yeah.
So it means a lot. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Devla. Merry Christmas.
Yeah, Merry Christmas.